Welcome, Gunrunner.
Those of you who've been following my channel for a while now might remember that just over 2 years ago I did an amazing facts video looking at the Fujitsu FM Towns Marty console, which proved to be pretty popular, and I always envisaged that I would be returning to the world of Fujitsu once again to cover the FM Towns computer that it was based on, and here we are. Given the clamour for me to cover lesser known Japanese computers that we didn't get in the West, which is proved by previous episodes on the Sharp X1, NEC PC98, MSX Turbo R and Sharp X68000, I already had a feeling that the FM Towns would win the latest poll, and it did, comfortably beating the Apple II GS, Amstrad CPC Plus, Jupiter Ace and Spectra Video SV318 and 328. Although what was interesting about this poll was that for several days the Spectra Video computers were winning, only for them to be reduced to just 17% of the final vote. For those that are unaware, the FM Towns was Fujitsu's entry into the 16-bit computer generation to rival the Sharp X68000, NEC PC98 and MSX Turbo R, but in many regards it could be described as the Japanese Acorn Archimedes, because it went one generation ahead by having a 32-bit CPU, and also some staggeringly powerful custom chips alongside it. But we'll look at all that in more detail as the video goes on. With sales of 500,000, it wasn't the huge success that Fujitsu hoped, mainly down to its high price, but still managed to carve a niche as a high-end home computer and built up a very passionate user base with it. But I don't want to go into any more detail about the FM Towns in this intro, because that would make the following video a little bit pointless. So let's get on with the show, shall we?
FM Towns 大集合.
Before I dig deep into the more technical and unknown facts, I think it's important to cover what that name is all about. I mean, I'm sure we all know about the Japanese tech giant Fujitsu, as they're still going strong today. But what is that FM Towns part all about? It certainly doesn't sound like the name of a home computer, does it? Well, let's get the simple part of the name out the way first, because the FM section of the name stands for Fujitsu Micro. Yep, it's literally a description of what it is. However, the second part is a lot more interesting, because that comes from the winner of the 1964 Nobel Prize in Physics, renowned American scientist Charles Towns. It was quite common for Fujitsu to use Nobel Prize winners as code names for their technology during the development phase, but in this case the name stuck. Although it's worth picking up on the new spelling, because Fujitsu decided to remove the E from his name because they were worried that people would mispronounce it as Townes. This name certainly made it stand out against its mostly numerically named rivals like the Sharp X68000 and NEC PC98, which sound quite dull and uninteresting in comparison.
FM Towns 大集合.
In the early 80s, the Japanese home computer market was a really crowded place. You had the market-leading MSX, NEC PC88, Sword M5, a Japanese version of the Commodore VIC-20, and several different Sharp machines, including the X1 and the MZ range. This saw a lot of computers disappear within months of being launched, like the Casio PV2000 and Tomy Tutor for example, with them unable to gain enough market share to make them viable. But one of the select group that did manage to make it into people's homes in decent numbers was the Fujitsu FM7. Released in Japan in November 1982, the FM7 was actually a stripped down version of an existing computer called the FM8, which Fujitsu had launched 6 months earlier. However, the FM8 was far from a success, being deemed too expensive compared to its rivals, so Fujitsu took it back to the drawing board and hastily worked on a replacement. These would be the FM7 aimed at the home market and the FM11 which was focused on the business market. The most notable thing about the FM7 was that it bucked the trend presented by all its major rivals by not using a Zilog Z80 CPU. Instead, Fujitsu went with the Motorola 6809, the same processor used by the Tandy Coco and its Welsh cousin, the Dragon 32, which gave it a very unique hardware setup with lots of processing power. This was backed up by high-resolution colour graphics and a new General Instruments AY sound chip, which couldn't be found in the FM8. Several upgrades of the FM7 followed, including the later FM77 computers that massively upgraded the graphics hardware and added built-in disk drives before it was discontinued in 1990, so Fujitsu could put all their focus into the new FM Towns. But without the success of the FM7, it's unlikely the FM Towns would have even been released, especially after the failure of the FM8, so it plays a very important part in this story.
FM Towns 大集合
Released in 1989, the FM Towns wasn't actually Fujitsu's first venture into 1632-bit computing, as they had already been selling their own range of MS-DOS based PC compatibles alongside the 8-bit FM7 known as the FMR50. But Fujitsu was struggling to sell these machines because there were so many other PC compatibles on the market, and big rivals NEC had very much locked down this sector with their PC98 range, which I've already covered on the channel for those interested, video link in the description as always. After analysing the market for a while, Fujitsu soon realised that they had been going down the wrong route, and looked at two things in particular: the success of their own FM7 computer and the way the Nintendo Famicom had started to dominate the home market, especially for people who just wanted to play games. The key points they picked up from this analysis was that you needed your own proprietary hardware so your machine had a point of difference from its rivals, and also the added control you had over the software released for it, not to mention the way it could be monetized. And secondly, they realised that they needed a combination of the two things: a computer that was equally adept at playing games as it was for more serious uses. So they took the PC part of their existing hardware, meaning it would be easy to make all those existing business and productivity packages work on their new hardware, and then bolted on a plethora of more advanced graphics and sound hardware so it can match up favourably with the latest arcade games. And I'll dig into the FM Towns technical abilities in more detail in just a moment.
FM Towns 大集合
Now, I just said that I wanted to dig down into the technical specifications of the FM Towns in more detail, so let's do that right now. And I want to look at the graphics hardware in particular, because that includes the computer's most innovative feature. But before I do, I just want to mention the other hardware that makes the FM Towns tick. The main driving force in the Fujitsu Micro is a 16MHz AMD 386SX CPU. This was later upgraded to a 20MHz version and then a 386DX before being replaced with a 486 variation and eventually a Pentium processor. Early models came with 2MB of RAM, but this got progressively larger with every new model. The audio hardware was nearly as impressive as the graphics hardware, boasting not just one but two sound chips. A Yamaha YM2612 offering 6-channel FM synthesis, a bit like the Sega Mega Drive, and a custom Ricoh RF5C68 giving a further 8 PCM channels with 10-bit audio and 19.6 kHz sample rate. Now, as impressive as all this is, it's the graphical prowess that really stands out, and one feature in particular, the ability to overlay 2 graphical layers. This is very flexible too, as you can overlay 2 bitmap layers, or a sprite layer with a bitmap background layer, and this also includes being able to mix different video modes too. So for example, you could use the 320x200 video mode with 32,768 colours overlaid with a high resolution 640x480 mode using 16 colours, which allows games to combine high colour graphics with high resolution text elements. When you also consider the separate video RAM ability to display 1024 sprites and separate sprite RAM, the FM Towns was pretty much unrivaled when it came to its video hardware upon release.
FM Towns 大集合.
Now, earlier on in this video I touched on the subject of Fujitsu being partly inspired by consoles of the era when it came to creating the FM Towns computer, and I'm sure that many of you are well aware of the existence of an actual FM Towns console in the form of the Marty. Indeed, I've already covered this in an Amazing Facts episode of its own that I've linked down in the description for those who want to know more, but it would be wrong not to talk about it here also. After releasing the FM Towns computer in 1989, Fujitsu couldn't shake the idea of producing a home console too, and in late 1992 they decided to finally take the plunge. There were several reasons for the creation of the Marty: the console inspiration for the FM Towns that I already talked about, the thought that a cost-reduced version of the hardware would bring more success, like it had with the aforementioned FM7, and the race to the next generation of consoles that would eventually arrive in the mid-90s. Fujitsu figured that they already had the hardware, so didn't need to spend years on the development of new technology like Japanese market leaders Sega, NEC and Nintendo, and all they had to do was put the FM Towns hardware into a keyboard-less case. Released in February 1993, the Marty would instantly become the world's first 32-bit console, but this wasn't all. It also offered up several other quite remarkable innovations. Firstly, there was the design that included both a disk drive and CD-ROM, meaning it could play most of the existing FM Towns games available on the market, giving it an instant software library. In fact, it was the very first console to feature both a CD and a disk drive. In fact, I can't actually think of another one, and could be upgraded into a fully fledged FM Towns computer with the addition of a keyboard add-on. Then there was the Car Marty, a portable version of the console that was designed to run off a car charger and came with built-in sat-nav and the option of a detachable LCD screen. Unfortunately, there was no way to upgrade the Marty, so it was soon left behind by the advancements of its computer-based sibling, and despite some promising sales initially, it soon died out once the likes of Sony and Sega released their next-generation machines.
FM Towns 大集合.
The FM Towns is packed full of innovative and interesting features that very much complement its hybrid identity, and when we look at the computer's operating system, we have yet another great example of this. The Fujitsu Micros OS is comprised of several parts, which starts with a bespoke graphical interface called Towns OS, which is based on MS-DOS and the Farlap DOS extender. The FM Towns range was also able to run Microsoft Windows 3 too. Now, remember when I said that the FM Towns had some console-like design aspects, and one of those was Fujitsu's wish to control the software licensing and make money from it? Well, that's where this OS becomes very important, because you couldn't access the FM Towns hardware without getting past the custom OS, and to do this you needed a key, which Fujitsu charged a small license fee to obtain. This makes it quite unlike any other home computer of the age, and a lot more like a console with a system BIOS. This system lockout also meant that Fujitsu could sell dev kits to software houses too, having developed both machine code assembly and C environments. Although this somewhat stifled the amount of software available for the FM Towns, it did mean a higher amount of quality control, more income for Fujitsu, and, most importantly, games that actually used the hardware better, as Fujitsu's own tools made it easier for devs to exploit all the special hardware capabilities when other companies, like Sega for example, were being accused of not giving devs full support, so their own games looked better than the competition. It's also worth pointing out that the FM Towns was the first system to boot its OS from a CD, 2 years before Commodore did the same with its Amiga CD-TV. This wasn't the first time they outdid Commodore either, as the American company launched the Amiga CD32 with claims of it being the first 32-bit console, when it had already been beaten to that accolade by Fujitsu's Marty.
FM Towns 大集合.
I've already touched on the gaming credentials of the FM Towns and the way its dev environment helps software publishers make the most out of the hardware, giving users quality over quantity. But I think that I should focus on the games aspect for a moment, and particularly the seriously impressive arcade ports that the machine has to offer. When I first started exploring the FM Towns and its extensive games library, First thing that caught my eye was the Sega Superscaler ports, coin-ops that most machines of the age failed to do justice to with their conversions, even Sega's own. The FM Towns conversions of games like Afterburner, Turbo Outrun, Strike Fighter, and in particular Galaxy Force 2 put all the other ports of the time to shame, remaining remarkably close to the original source material. But these aren't alone in the library, because they're also amazing ports of famous arcade games like Truxton, Rainbow Islands, Raiden, Chase HQ, Marble Madness, Saturday Night Slam Masters, and Super Street Fighter 2. The last couple of games are particularly interesting, given that Capcom's games were developed on a computer produced by Fujitsu's big rival Sharp in the X68000.
FM Towns 大集合.
Earlier on in this video I talked about the FM Towns' unique hardware setup, as well as its innovative operating system, but I also want to come back to that for this next entry, because the later FM Towns models featured a slightly different setup that very much sought to capitalise on its PC-like architecture, something that rivals NEC also did with their PC-98. It's common knowledge that as the mid-90s came around, the IBM PC Compatible began to utterly dominate in the home computer sector, as it had already done in the business market before it, pushing out and ultimately killing off companies like Atari, Commodore, Panasonic, Sharp and Acorn. Well, as far as their home computer ranges went anyway, but sometimes the whole company too, such as the case of Commodore International. Fujitsu, like NEC, managed to stave off death by adapting their computers in such a way that they could be used in place of regular PC compatibles, while still keeping the hardcore Fujitsu fans happy. In November 1995, Fujitsu announced the new FMV Towns range. These new Pentium-based machines featured a switch that allowed you to either run it as a standard PC compatible or as a regular FM Towns, giving full backwards compatibility with the range. These machines also came with Windows 95 pre-installed, so to all intents and purposes worked exactly like a standard PC, just with the added FM Towns extras to keep customers happy. These FMV machines stayed on the market for several years before Fujitsu migrated to only producing PC-compatible computers, finally killing off the FM Towns range for good, causing much sadness from its hardcore fanbase that still exists in Japan to this day.
FM Towns 大集合.
At a time when most of the home computing world was still using floppy disks and 8 or 16-bit CPUs, Fujitsu made the choice to go a generation ahead and not only equip their computers with a 32-bit CPU, but also a CD-ROM drive alongside a regular 3.5-inch disk drive. Just a year before NEC had begun to introduce the format, not only to their home computers but also their PC Engine console too, where its extended capabilities was really starting to turn heads. But whereas Fujitsu's rivals were starting to offer CD-ROM as an add-on or optional extra on more expensive machines, the FM Towns was offering customers a CD drive as standard. This was initially a single speed drive that was mounted vertically on the front of the computer, giving it a very striking look indeed. These early machines are known as Grey Towns, but later computers doubled the speed and had more standard PC-like CD trays instead. Some later machines also offered up double disk drives alongside the CD-ROM too. What is interesting about the FM Towns, however, is that it didn't come with a hard drive as standard, unlike pretty much all PCs of the time, or even offer one as an option until much later models came along. However, there was a space to fit one inside the case, and third-party SCSI drives were soon made available for those who wanted to fit one.
FM Towns 大集合.
Whenever I cover more obscure systems, I always get people asking how they can play them in the present day. So aside from forking out huge amounts of cash for the real thing, the answer as always is via emulation. So I thought it would be good to go over the EMU options as my last entry in this list. Although a true and proper open source FM Towns emulator still doesn't exist sadly, there are 5 different options when it comes to playing Fujitsu micro games on your PC. UNS is the only FM Towns Marty emulator with very high compatibility, but hasn't been updated since 2010. Despite the website and documentation being in Japanese, the emulator is available in English. It cannot run ISOs directly, instead choosing to read game data from an optical drive that's attached to the host system. Thankfully, ISOs can easily be mounted as virtual optical drives on most modern OSs, even Windows 10. Floppy disk images, however, can be loaded directly into the emulator itself. Sugaru is a new FM Towns emulation project started in January 2020. The developer is currently claiming 97% software compatibility, but you'll need a pretty powerful PC to use it, and there is still a few bugs and glitches within the compatible games. As this one is still being worked on, it will hopefully continue to improve and eventually become the default option for all FM Towns emulation. Other options include a plugin for MAME, although this is incredibly buggy and incomplete, XE, which is a Linux-based option but suffers from similar compatibility problems, and finally Botch, which is written in C++ and geared around emulating the full x86 architecture, but again, the FM Towns module within this emulator is very patchy. I'll provide a link to all of these in the description so you can check them out and hopefully experience this great system for yourself.
東京より遊びが面白い。ニューヨークよりビジネスが面白い。LA より音楽が面白い。声もサウンドもリアルに楽しめるパソコン。富士通 FM Towns。これは街より面白い。富士通。
And that rounds up my look at 10 amazing FM Towns facts. But which one of these fabulous facts was your favourite, or can you think of any other tantalising tidbits of trivia that I didn't include? We always love to hear the thoughts and views of my audience, so please get typing in that comments section. Before I go though, I must thank all of my loyal patrons and YouTube backers for continuing to support my channel and make videos like this possible. However, I must give special thanks to the following people in particular for their much appreciated pledges: Paul Daniel, Mins, Dos Gamerman, Luke MC, Carl Olsen, Seth Robinson, Frosty, Mark Strickland, Glimmertorn, Trogdor the Burninator, Daniel Skoronsky, Ben P. Stein, Tabby Kitsune, David Maddox, Your Eyes Are Bleeding, Joe Casara, Classic Gamer 74, Bernard Santu, Peter Grantham, Noah Mann and Electron Star Collapse. If you also want to help support all my creative endeavours, including this YouTube channel, then please go and check out my Patreon right now, where you can get access to host extra content including downloads, exclusive videos, creative insights and much more besides. I've been the Laird, I thank you for watching and I'll see you all again for another video very soon.